Remember to give the video a thumbs up, share your insights in the comments, and subscribe to keep up with our newest narratives. That night took me by surprise, transforming my entire perspective. The journey I've taken, the decisions I've made, and particularly the individual with whom I collaborated for more than 10 years. Yet, there are instances that catch you off guard, revealing themselves like a flawlessly orchestrated melody, each sound resonating profoundly within your soul. It began like any other evening. The annual gala of the company had just concluded, and the city lights sparkled through the expansive glass windows of the rooftop venue. The sounds of my coworkers' laughter lingered in my mind as I stepped into the night, breathing in the crisp air, thankful for the quietude beyond the clamor. The slight pinch of my heels served as a reminder of the long hours I had spent on my feet, maintaining a smile. As I was about to leave, I glanced back at him, James Carter, the man who had been my boss for the last 12 years. With silver at the temples and a sharply tailored outfit, he exuded the confidence of someone who had crafted his success from the very foundation. At 61, he maintained his usual composure and control, yet there was an unmistakable shift in his expression that evening. "Just stepping outside for a breath of fresh air," I said, giving a slight smile. What an extraordinary celebration that was. He moved next to me, hands buried in his pockets, his typical demeanor of command gently mellowed by the warm light of the street lamps. It certainly was. To be frank, these events don't quite resonate with me. I let out a soft laugh. "Humorous. You guide them each year." "It's simply business," he remarked, tilting his head slightly in my direction. "It appeared that you genuinely found pleasure in the experience." I merely shrugged. "I guess I've mastered the role." He chuckled softly, and for a brief moment, we lingered in a serene quietude. The city buzzed with life, yet in that fleeting moment, it was merely the two of us, shoulder to shoulder, distanced from the rigid protocols of the workplace. Then arrived the words I had not anticipated. He confessed that he wasn't quite prepared to head home just yet. "Would you like to accompany me for a drink?" I paused. It was quite common for us to converse beyond work hours, engaging in late-night discussions and strategy sessions that extended into the night. Yet this seemed distinct. His tone carried an unspoken weight, a subtle hint that quickened my pulse ever so slightly. "Absolutely." At last, I spoke up. "Why not indeed?" We strolled down the street, leaving behind the dazzling towers of downtown and venturing into a more tranquil part of the city. He guided me into a cozy lounge, where the lighting was dim and soft jazz floated gently through the air. It was a location that exuded a sense of eternity, remaining unspoiled by the frantic pace of the outside world. As we nestled into a cozy corner booth, he relaxed his tie, a rare sight that caught my attention. He gazed at me, truly gazed at me, as though perceiving me in an entirely different way. "You've been with the company for quite some time," he remarked, gently swirling the amber liquid in his glass. 12 years. I gave a slight nod. "Have you ever contemplated how life could have unfolded had you taken a different route?" His question took me by surprise. "Are you inquiring whether I have any regrets about my decisions?" He shook his head in disbelief. "No regrets. Simply a matter of curiosity. Have you ever contemplated the paths left unexplored?" I released my breath gently. It seems that, at one time or another, we all experience this. I've always held the conviction that each choice, each path we follow, guides us precisely to where we are destined to arrive. He grinned at that. "That's a thoughtful perspective." We engaged in a deep conversation, truly connecting for the first time in years. It's not focused on tasks, timelines, or performance evaluations, but rather on the essence of existence. He shared with me the story of his formative years, the challenges faced in establishing the company, and the sacrifices that accompanied that journey. I revealed fragments of my being, the aspirations I once nurtured, the experiences that molded me. Time became indistinct. One drink led to 2, then 3. In that moment, as we shared memories and laughter, the atmosphere around us transformed. He extended his hand over the table, his fingers lightly brushing against mine, tentative, exploring. I remained steadfast. A fleeting instant, a breath held tight where all possibilities teetered on the edge. And then, softly, he confessed, "I never shared this before, but I've always held you in high regard, more than just for your craft. Your presence has a remarkable ability to anchor the world, bringing a sense of stability amidst the surrounding chaos." My heart raced with a heightened rhythm. I had received my fair share of praise, yet this one resonated in a way that was uniquely profound. It was not mere flattery. It was, in essence, something profound and authentic. "You've always been the unwavering presence," he continued. Perhaps I took an excessive amount of time to understand the depth of that significance. I hesitated, uncertain of how to reply. He was more than just my superior. He was someone I had held in high regard for years, a person whose perspective I had cherished more than I would like to acknowledge. And yet, as I sat there in the cozy embrace of that softly illuminated lounge, my mind drifted far from thoughts of work or the demands of professionalism. I found myself reflecting on the way he gazed at me, as though he were finally perceiving a woman he had previously kept hidden from his own sight. "I suppose I should make my way home," I finally admitted, though my tone was far from certain. He observed me intently for a while, then gave a nod of acknowledgement. "I would be happy to guide you." The streets had grown hushed, the city embracing its late-night cadence. Upon arriving at my building, we paused at the entrance. "Thank you for this evening," he expressed, "for your attentive ear." A smile graced my lips. "The same could be said to you." A moment of stillness, a flicker of uncertainty. And then, before I could hesitate, I leaned in, just a bit, just enough. In that instant, everything else faded away, reducing existence to just two souls, where time lost its grip and only the present remained palpable. But before anything else could unfold, I drew in a shaky breath. "Good night, James," I murmured, crossing the threshold before I could surrender entirely. With the door shutting behind me, I leaned against it, my heart racing. A change had occurred in our connection. And beneath the surface, I understood this was merely the start. The following morning, I rose earlier than normal, my thoughts still entwined with the happenings of the night before. The way James gazed at me, the gentle heat of his hand resting on mine, the silence filled with unexpressed thoughts that linger between us. For years, I viewed him solely as my superior, a figure of power, admiration, and separation. Yet, I found myself unable to shake thoughts of him, James, the man who had lowered his defenses, who had shared his feelings with a gentle honesty, who had gazed at me in a manner that sent my heart racing. I shook my head, attempting to dispel the swirling thoughts as I poured my morning coffee. This was absurd. Nothing occurred. Nothing could occur. As I entered the office, an unusual, persistent tension enveloped me, as though the very atmosphere had shifted. I glimpsed him through the pane of his office. He was engaged in a call, yet for the briefest instant, his gaze lifted and connected with mine. A moment of stillness. A moment of uncertainty. Then he offered me the faintest of smiles, a gesture meant solely for my eyes. A subtle tempest stirred within me, a whisper of turmoil just beneath the surface. The day slipped away in a haze of discussions and correspondence, yet my thoughts wandered endlessly. It was particularly unsettling that James appeared more attentive than ever, lingering at my desk more frequently, locking eyes with me for a moment longer than was comfortable. As the afternoon wore on, a sense of restlessness began to take hold of me. I craved the crispness of the outdoors, a breath of clarity for my racing mind. I ventured out onto the modest office terrace, breathing in the refreshing autumn air. The city hummed beneath, a melody of far-off honks and conversations. Engrossed in my musings, I failed to notice the door creak open behind me. "It seems you've been steering clear of me." James' voice carried a serene quality, yet it held a subtle sharpness beneath the surface. I pivoted, managing a soft laugh. "Steering clear of you? That seems rather theatrical." He moved nearer, hands buried in his pockets, wearing that same enigmatic look on his face. Could it be? I let out a weary breath, massaging my temples. "James, last evening." It was distinct. He completed it for me. "I understand." I gazed up at him, the man I had collaborated with for countless years, and yet in this instant, he seemed like a stranger. Perhaps, for the very first time, I was perceiving him with clarity. I whispered that we couldn't do this, but the words seemed empty as they left my lips. He observed me intently for a prolonged moment, then let out a breath. I understand your thoughts. This poses a significant risk. It alters the situation. It certainly alters the situation, I stated with conviction. James, you hold the position of my superior. Guidelines and standards exist. I don't care about rules, he interrupted, his voice low yet unwavering. I gazed at him intently. This was not the poised, deliberate individual I recognized. This was another individual. Someone who, for a change, wasn't preoccupied with commerce or authority or obligations. He had me on his mind. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, he continued, his tone gentler now. Last night, we transcended the roles of boss and employee. We were merely two individuals. And I believe I understand we both experienced something. I took a deep breath. That doesn't imply it's correct. He inclined his head, his eyes probing into mine. And still, you haven't expressed that you don't experience it as well. I parted my lips, yet silence enveloped me. The truth lingered between us, palpable and unfiltered. A sensation had stirred within me. A sensation I hadn't experienced in ages. He moved in a fraction, his voice a mere breath against the silence. If you think I'm mistaken, I'll let it go. Last night will fade from my memory. I had the desire to. I longed to express the thoughts, to distance myself, to act as if everything could return to its former state. However, I chose not to. I was uncertain about my desire to proceed. The atmosphere around us shimmered, a silent force drawing us nearer. My breath caught in my throat as he extended his hand, his fingertips grazing my wrist ever so lightly. A query, not an obligation. For the first time in years, I found myself not wanting to think. I remained close. James' fingertips grazed the inside of my wrist, yet the sensation resonated throughout my entire being. My heart raced, the heat of his hand igniting a subtle tremor within me. For years, I had existed within the confines of expectations, those imposed upon me, my career, and my age. I had constructed an existence centered on certainty and logic. Yet, as I stood there, with James gazing at me as if I were an intriguing surprise, I sensed the walls begin to move. He lingered, observing for any indication that my desire matched his own. And in that instant, I took action. I exhaled gently. James, I'm uncertain about the direction this takes. He offered a faint smile. I feel the same way. However, that doesn't imply we should flee from it. A gentle wind whispered across the terrace, sending a chill down my spine. He observed right away, removing his suit jacket and placing it gently over my shoulders. His scent, a subtle blend of spiced cologne, warm and familiar, enveloped me. Let's go, he urged, gesturing toward the office door. It's time for us to leave this place. I paused. Are you referring to the present moment? Why not indeed? His voice carried a lightness, yet beneath it lay a quiet determination. I cast a fleeting look back through the glass doors. The office buzzed with the lingering energy of the day's end, as individuals navigated the familiar rhythms of their routines. Returning inside, I could already envision the unfolding of the evening. I would collect my belongings, return home, prepare a meal, and spend time in solitude with my reflections, acting as if everything remained the same. Yet, a shift had occurred. For the first time in ages, I felt a strong desire to seize an opportunity and not let it slip away. Very well, I replied, my tone more composed than I had anticipated. Let us proceed. We found ourselves in a serene, softly illuminated eatery just a short stroll away, the sort of venue where the melodies were gentle and the servers communicated in whispers. James ordered a bottle of wine, and with the first sip warming my throat, I began to feel a sense of relaxation wash over me. With a deliberate motion, I placed my glass on the table and inquired, "What precisely is our purpose here?" He reclined, observing me with that same enigmatic look he consistently wore in the office. Yet this evening, an additional presence lingered in the air. To be frank, he swirled his wine, observing how the rich crimson liquid danced in the light. I longed for a place with you where we could be our true selves. I gulped. Imagine. He locked his gaze with mine. That final evening held no significance. The words fell into the space between us, weighty and undeniable. I parted my lips, seeking the perfect words to express myself. Yet this time, I felt a desire to throw caution to the wind. I preferred not to dissect each word before it escaped my mouth. I let out a breath. Indeed, it did. A brief glimmer of emotion crossed his features. Perhaps a sense of relief, or perhaps something more profound. We engaged in conversation for hours following that. It's not related to work. It's not about obligations. However, let's discuss us. I shared with him truths I hadn't voiced in years. How I had dedicated so much time to prioritizing my career. How I had persuaded myself that love, passion, and connection were meant for others. Individuals in their youth. Individuals who possessed an abundance of time at their disposal. James paid attention. Truly attentive. As silence enveloped the space between us, he extended his hand across the table, his fingers grazing mine in a gesture both understated and intentional, causing my breath to hitch. You're not the only one feeling that way, he remarked. I placed my trust in him. As we departed from the restaurant, the city had settled into a serene hush. The streets shimmered under the gentle amber glow of the streetlights, while the distant murmur of traffic broke the stillness surrounding us. We strolled for a time, both reluctant to part ways just yet. At the crosswalk, he paused and looked back at me. I don't want to rush this, he said gently. However, I also refuse to act as if this is insignificant. My heart raced, James. He let out a soft laugh, shaking his head slightly. I understand. The situation is intricate. I released a soft, airy chuckle. That barely scratches the surface. We lingered for a moment, the city bustling around us, yet it felt as if we were the only two souls in existence. In that moment, driven by instinct, I moved closer, unburdened by thought or hesitation. James' breath caught, his gaze probing into mine. And then, at last, I allowed myself to truly experience my emotions. The kiss unfolded slowly, hesitantly, reminiscent of the initial notes of a melody we had yet to discover together. His hand gently cupped the side of my face, his touch tender and full of respect. As we finally separated, his forehead gently touched mine. This alters the entire landscape, doesn't it? I murmured. Indeed, he whispered. Perhaps that's not as unfavorable as it seems. I shut my eyes, allowing the warmth of the moment to envelop me. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had a point. The following morning, I awoke to a whirlwind of emotions churning within me. Thrill, apprehension, ambiguity. The recollection of the previous evening remained on my lips, infused with the warmth of James' touch, in the way he gazed at me as if I were something truly worth the wait. Yet, as the morning sun poured into my bedroom, the grip of reality began to reassert itself. I remained under his employment. He remained my superior. We had traversed a boundary that was irrevocable. The sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand broke the silence of the night. James, good morning. I trust there are no regrets. A faint smile tugged at the corners of my mouth as I responded with my fingers dancing across the keys. Myself. None. Me. He replied without hesitation. James. Not even one. May I have the pleasure of your company later? I paused. Not that I lacked the desire. I did, but I was uncertain about what the future held for us. Is it possible for us to thrive beyond the confines of the office? Beyond the carefully traced boundaries we had adhered to for such an extended period? I inhaled deeply. Myself. Absolutely, but let's have a conversation first. That evening, we gathered at a serene park just beyond the city limits, far removed from the clamor and the watchful gaze of the workplace. James stood there, poised against a bench, his hands tucked casually into his pockets as I approached. He glanced up as I drew near, his expression more gentle than I had ever witnessed. Greetings, he remarked. Hey, I replied, taking a seat next to him. For a moment, we simply lingered, observing the warm glow of the setting sun weave its way through the branches. Then I began to express my thoughts. James, I must find out. What are the next steps from this point? He let out a breath, as though he had been anticipating the inquiry. He acknowledged that he didn't possess all the answers. However, I am certain about what I wish to avoid. I wish for last night to remain a part of our reality, not something we sweep under the rug. I nodded with deliberation. I feel the same way. He shifted his gaze in my direction. Let's focus on the essence rather than constraints or anticipations. Let's focus on our journey, in whatever form it may take. I took a deep breath. And what about work? He let out a gentle laugh. This won't impact your professional journey. You've put in so much effort for that. Should the need arise, we will engage in a discussion regarding boundaries in the workplace. However, I'm reluctant to let go of what we have simply due to logistical issues. His words resonated profoundly within me. For a long time, I allowed my apprehension about what lies ahead to hold me back from embracing risks, from experiencing emotions I convinced myself were beyond my age. Yet there was James standing next to me, ready to unravel it all together. I extended my hand toward him. All right, I stated with a calm tone. Let's explore the possibilities ahead. His smile radiated a sense of undeniable relief. As he drew me into a gentle, lingering kiss beneath the dimming glow of twilight, a realization washed over me. This was a night that transformed into something truly memorable. A fresh start unfolded,